From the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Just Conversations, presented by the Metro Human Relations Commission.
Welcome to Just Conversations episode on Facts Not Fiction, Know Your Rights Now, being filmed at the National Museum of African American Music. I'm your host, Joy Johnson-Caruthers, and I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists and have them say hello. So first we have Barbara Gunn-Lartey, Esquire, Director of Community Engagement, and her superpowers are inspiring individual organizations and communities to reclaim their voices. Say hello to Barbara.
Greetings.
Next, we have Arthur Butler, graduate student with Vanderbilt School of Divinity and Community Development and Action. His superpowers include being an astute, visionary, solution-oriented paradigm shifter for social justice. Let's say hello to Arthur Butler.
It's good to be here.
Next, we have Kosar Kosar, and if I'm not pronouncing this, he's going to repronounce his name for us, but he is the multicultural organizer with the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. His superpowers include being an advocate who co-founded Safer Schools Nashville. So let's say hello to Kosar.
Hello, y'all, and it's Kosar Kosar. You're close, but thank you. Thank you.
And last but not least, we have attorney Courtney Teasley, founder, senior partner of the Courtney Teasley law firm. Her superpowers include being a true 21st century gladiator who is an East Nashville native, is no stranger to fighting and winning for justice. Let's say hello to Courtney.
Hi, hey everyone.
All right, well, let's just jump right in. So I'm going to start with Arthur over here to my left. Please share your thoughts on the history of racial disparities in policing Black bodies in America. So where do you think we are today in comparison to the past?
It's hard to say, to quantify it into those two because you don't want to compare the suffering. But I do want to emphasize that the similar things are going on in a very systematic way that is falling on Black bodies. And we have, folks who are being overly policed have access to information that they hadn't before. Mm-hmm. And we're coming to the conclusion, not just that we have information, how this information is construed to, in terms of policing Black bodies, to put the responsibility on those being policed to make the police feel safer. So there's a strong divestment from that. And that's what I'm.
Okay. So we've all heard about situations where people did everything that they possibly could to comply, yet they still ended up injured or in some cases even killed or murdered. And so, Courtney, what are some things that citizens can do to reduce the risk during police encounters?
Well, my thought process is I don't think it should be on that person to have to reduce the risk. It should be on that officer knowing, having the proper training, not being taught to be scared of people who look different than them and whatnot. However, oftentimes that's not true. So some things that we can do to reduce the risk is we can actually know what our rights are. Mm-hmm. Because if we actually know what our rights are, then we actually know how to assert them and use them properly, not being unsure of ourselves when we say, because when you're unsure, then they take advantage of that because they think, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So then they try to confuse you. But if you know what it is, then you know how to assert yourself and know that just because I'm asserting my rights doesn't mean that I'm being disrespectful. It's only ever taught to us that we're being disrespectful when we assert our rights or when we say what it is. You can be polite, you can be nice as you can, but actually knowing your rights and asserting them is, in my opinion, how you first start to reduce that risk.
Okay. And so, like, can I opt not? You're saying know your rights, but you know, can I opt not to engage in a conversation when they say, "Well, do you know why I stopped you?" or where are you coming from? And you know, also, if I try to record it and the officer's like, "Don't record." So
yes,
how does that play out?
So I love that question. Can you opt not to? I think it was a casual questioning. Can I stop? Can I not get into speaking about anything outside of the stop? And absolutely, you do not have to talk about anything outside of that stop. A lot of times, you know, we're taught to be polite as just humans in general by engaging in small talk, right? Somebody's like, "Hey, where are you coming from?" You know, you're just no big deal. It's not a threat for you to tell them. However, sometimes when you're getting pulled over by an officer, that's very important. We're asking where you came from, and then you say you came from a party, and then all of a sudden you came from a party turns into how many drinks you had, and then how many drinks you had turns into get out this car and perform this test. So you don't have to talk about anything outside of that stop. You stopped me, well, officer, well, hey, what did you stop me for? I stopped you because your headlight was out. Okay, well, it's not important about anything else. It's not important about where I came from, where I'm heading to, or anything. You stopped me because my headlight was out. Oh, okay. Did you know it was out? You know, I'm not sure. I didn't think it was out at all. Okay. Well, can I get my ticket?
Right.
So I can leave.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to chime in on that one? Because that's a lot to unpack, you know, and even when I want to use my phone, you know, I've heard stories of individuals saying, I pulled my phone out and the officer told me to put it down. And we've even seen that on tape. So any thoughts on that? Anybody?
I can add a little bit. You know, it's important to know that, you know, you have the right to remain silent and the right to privacy. So if they, you know, ever ask, can I search your car? They can't search your car. And so it's important that, you know, from the get-go, just consent to, you know, I don't consent to, you know, you searching me or, you know, just letting them know that. And then, you know, if the search does happen, then that's on record.
Yes, and I totally agree. And to answer your question about the phones and whatnot, what should you do? I always tell people that, you know, when you get blue lighted, you're getting pulled over, right? You need to get somebody on the phone immediately, or you need to start recording right then. You know, just because you're recording, you don't have to have your phone up in their face showing them, hey, I'm recording. You're in Tennessee here. It's a one-party state. You can record. You can press record on your phone and just set it down and just let it catch what it may. And that will tell a whole lot of things. You can call someone. The biggest point is it records your time, how long that officer had you pulled over, because if he has you pulled over for too long, that can become an unlawful detention. And so you want to record that, and you want to record and hear when you're speaking loudly enough, because you know it's recording. No, you cannot search my car. No, I do not consent to this. No, I don't want to talk about anything else. And if, like you said, if he goes ahead and does it, well, you got that recording. Your lawyer can use it and help suppress that in court.
Yeah, thank you. That's powerful. So, Barbara, we see a lot of, you know, news about parents, past and present, giving their Black and brown children the talk. Can you talk a little bit about that? And what's the best advice that you can give to people of color if they're feeling unsafe doing an encounter with the police?
Joy, I really appreciate that question. And in fact, I was thinking about Arthur's answer when you asked how police Black bodies. And what occurred to me is that the distinction being made between Black bodies and other bodies, and the fact that police are policing Black bodies and not Black people. And so when parents give us the talk, the talk is not about what are our rights, right? The talk is come home safely. We can put our hands at, at 3 o'clock and whatever, 11, 10 o'clock. We can wait until they ask for identification. We can wait until they ask us to get something in our glove compartment. And I've heard actually officers say, well, when I get pulled over, I'm nervous as well. We're not nervous. At a cellular level, we are dealing with the trauma of whether or not we are going to leave this encounter alive. So in addition, in terms of parents parenting or giving our children the talk, do parents know what the rights are?
Exactly.
Yes.
And so what's being passed on? And so, I would answer that by saying that, yes, it's important for parents to empower their children, our children, about our rights. But the talk really is about how can we come home safely.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, yes,
Mhm.
yes. And, you know, and we're talking pretty much about traffic stops
Yeah.
or being stopped in the community.
Mhm.
But what about those situations where the police show up at your house? You
That's
know,
right.
parents are
Yes.
sometimes put in an
Yes.
awkward situation. You know,
Yes.
police come to the house asking for your
Mhm.
son or daughter, or asking for
Mhm.
information. You know,
Right.
how what's the best way to address that? Anybody want to take that one on?
I'd love to piggyback on this. Me and Miss Barbara actually had a good conversation about that. But the biggest point from that is we have to teach our children not to call for mom and dad. Your child needs to know to ask for an attorney.
Mhm.
Whenever an officer is speaking with them, they have to do that because there is no, and I get the call all the time. Oh my gosh, somebody talked to my child. The officer went and talked to my child. He didn't even get my permission. We don't need your permission. How did the Central Park 5 happen? Right?
Right.
Because you can do that. They can talk to your child. So your child has to know the bare minimum,
That's right.
which is, I want a lawyer.
That's right.
And then to just be quiet. So that has to be a part of our talks now.
That's
Right.
Because we can come home alive and whatnot, or you can, but then your child can be taken away and be a black body rotting away in prison.
That's right.
Yes.
Because of something that they said as a child, and we know their prefrontal cortex is not even all the way developed.
Exactly.
So that is huge. I'm glad you brought that up.
Kosar,
No,
you wanted
yeah.
to chime in on that.
You know, if an officer doesn't have a warrant, then you shouldn't be opening the door. They can't go in your house unless they have a warrant. So it's important to ask for a warrant if they
Yes.
do not come knocking. And even if they don't have a warrant, if you open the door,
Mhm.
that's almost as if you're just letting them in. They can just go in. And so it's important that children know that specifically, as well as parents as well. And then to even look at it from looking at black migrants, looking at black immigrants and refugees. ICE would show up, and it's important to know that ICE would say sometimes that they have a warrant, but their warrants aren't court issued, so they can't come into your house or apartment. And so it's important to just know those distinctions and know your rights in the house, in the car, walking. It's important that when we have those talks with I have my mom. Last year during the Black Liberation Movement, I remember my mom telling me don't go to the protest, out of fear that who are the ones typically brutalized at protests? Black bodies,
That's right.
Black youth. And so those are conversations that anytime I go out or anytime there's a protest, I have to always keep in mind and make sure okay, where am I positioned? Am I positioned in the middle of the protest, on the side of the protest, and that's at the front? Just making note of that. And it's unfortunate that we have to always think of that.
I want to piggyback off of that. I love that when the officer, and it's the law, you do not have to open the door at all. If the officer comes to your door, you don't have to open the door, because when you do open the door, then that invites this whole, I smell marijuana or something of that nature. You can speak to them through the door and ask those key questions. Do you have an arrest warrant? Do you have a search warrant? If the answer is no, then you don't have to open that door at all. And actually, they'll say, I can't hear. Can you open the door? Well, if you can't hear me, then I just can't worry about it. If you actually had that search warrant, arrest warrant, you're going to break this door down, huh?
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm not opening the door.
And I just want to briefly add this. So there is this concept that police are to protect and serve, right? So if someone comes to the door, it's different if a police officer or to your car, wherever, and says, stop, but if they're smiling. And if they're saying, listen, we just want to check in and see how things are going. Would you mind if we, just have a talk? Would you mind if we, step in? And, an immigrant's mother or someone else's, guardian or a child may say, sure, no problem. Not realizing that what they have done is just unwittingly consented to an illegal search. Right. And so being aware of those tactics, just because a police officer is smiling, protect and serve. In many cases, I think of officers as from the jump prosecuting and sanctioning, not so much protecting and serving.
Right.
Yeah, and that's something we need to think more about.
Right.
So as we move on, Kosar, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go to you, Arthur, is, in May of 2020, we all witnessed George Floyd being murdered on national TV for the most part. And that was traumatizing to a lot of communities. But we also watched a lot of bystanders who would not leave that scene and who filmed and were very courageous in kind of speaking up. So how can we as citizens be responsible bystanders? What can we do if we believe that we're witnessing excessive force or police brutality? Yeah. Let's start with Kosar, and then we'll check in with you, Arthur.
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, recognizing your positionality in that space. Do I have any privileges? If for example, if you're at a protest, typically what I would learn from at protests is, we'd have the white allies stand in the front to kind of protect the black and brown folks in the back, and so it's understanding, okay, can I intervene in this situation? And so the person that was videoing that they're also black.
Right.
They're also at risk. They could have been also George Floyd.
That's right.
So it's the only thing that they could do at the time was just record. And so that was obviously very traumatizing to watch and see. And tying it back to kind of like the work that I've done, I think in response to that, my organization created this Black Immigrant Caucus, basically to bring awareness, to form allyship, with the African American community, because the African American, liberation for African American people is liberation for all of us.
That's right.
So it's key to understand that.
That's right.
So trying to tie in, if you're a Black immigrant or a Black undocumented, at the end of the day, you could say you're from whichever country, but at the end of the day, we all have the same skin. We all have the same skin color. They'll just see us as another Black body. So it's important to really form those coalitions, those create those coalitions, so that when we are in situations like our protests or at an action, we could complement one another, and understand where can I be in this space.
Right.
I'm thinking about, thank you for that, Kosar. I'm thinking about the protests here in Nashville during and after that, in the aftermath, so many thousand folks. And me going into it was questioning, well, what's my privilege? But it's like, what can I do? Like, if I don't record and go get up in the police's face, like, this is wrong, this is what I'm liable to end up just like. So what works is hard. It's little things, like we would write down numbers on our arms just in case we get taken or detained. They take our phones, and we need somewhere to call who has access to. I mean, these, and I want to say this with a lot of things. I want to couch it, but these tactics, it's like knowing your rights isn't enough for a lot of Black and brown bodies. And so we have to make sure that we maybe one or two rows behind those in the front are knowledgeable of who can we call, what we're going to say, know our rights, have that identification on us, have somebody else attached to it. Those coalitions are important. But a lot of this change is not going to change. Not a lot of what needs to be changed is not going to change unless somebody gets into the hearts and minds of those officers, because there's only so much you can do. I mean, Black folks being killed inside their homes, outside their homes, complying, not complying. So, I mean, there's little things, collectives, groupings, making sure you're together, knowledgeable. But I think it's a larger conversation that needs to be had.
Thank you. So as we begin to wrap up, we've just got a few more minutes, but I want to hear from everyone. So we're going to start recording and kind of work our way around. And so we've seen a lot of things being taped. We've seen a lot of things kind of play out in social media. So what are some things that we can do if we feel that our rights are being violated? And where can I go to find more information about my rights or strategies to keep myself and my family members safe?
And sure, I was telling you that the problem was that there's a lack of resources. I come up in Metro Nashville public schools, and I didn't learn about my rights. I didn't know anything about how to have encounters with the police. Our school was predominantly Black. Why? And I mean, I was coached at Stratford, and still it was not being taught unless I was teaching it to my mock trial students. Why isn't this being taught to people who are most likely to come in contact with the police? So anywho, it's not being taught. So it's a very big need for it to be out there. If you did have something that happened and you wanted to complain or something of that nature, we have the COB, we have the NAACP, we have different organizations.
When you say COB, can you tell us what that is? I apologize.
Yes, the Community Oversight Board that's here in Nashville. Okay. We have that. If you wanted to lodge a complaint, you can. I always advocate if you want to lodge a complaint against an officer, doing it with the Office of Professional Accountability, as well as Metro Nashville Police Department, as well as the Community Oversight Board, as well as the NAACP. All of these different people are starting to work together in a better way, where we're able to really try and hold these different officers accountable for their actions. So, that's where I would start.
Okay.
Joy, I want to add to the space something that Courtney just said that I thought was quite poignant, and that is that I have a friend who's in his 50s. Okay, he's incarcerated right now. He consented to an illegal search of his car. His parents are angry that he consented to an illegal search of his car. But my friend said, I didn't know. We're talking about a brother that's in his 50s. I did not know. So those resources and those collectives are essential. But here's an additional layer in terms of knowing. I'm an attorney. I know my rights. But my daughter and I were pulled over one night. Okay? And I instantly asked my daughter to turn on the video. And I asked the officer, we're talking about being compliant and deferential. Officer, where's my infraction? I was never incited. I was yelled at, and I thought about my rights. But in that moment, my rights did not matter. What I was trying to do, bless her name, say her name, was not be the next Sandra Bland, right? Because we can know our rights. But if I'm looking at you, and I'm thinking about how this could play out, right? We can know our rights. The thing is, how do we walk them out? How do we flex them? How much privilege, how much ownership, how much agency do we really have in terms of walking out our rights? Right? So I really appreciate those resources, sis, that you mentioned, in those coalitions. Those are essential.
Yes. Okay, how about you?
I think it's, disseminating that information. I think, even, there are resources, but it's those resources can be scattered. They can be finding it in this email, or you have to talk to this person to find that contact. So it's like I think it's very important that we centralize a lot of this information so that people can go to whatever website or call whatever hotline, and they can just go get a lawyer or get some sort of advice or anything. So I think that's the most important thing, and I think it's something that I've had to learn too. It's like you should know who to call. You should know I can call a lawyer, and that I should know who to call. Because I think a lot of the times we think of the barriers when it comes to I'm not gonna call a lawyer because we're gonna have so much money billed. But it's like at the end of the day, it's your life that's at risk, and so it's important to know the resources that are available. There, public defenders, people, the NAACP,
and having that information before as opposed to after the fact. Right. We got just a few seconds left. Arthur, what can you add to that? What can we do, and where can we go?
Well, I think, like everybody said, information's out there. There's so much information everywhere. I will just be careful of information that requires you to put yourself down in order to be presentable, so you're not taken advantage of or manipulated by these policing Black bodies. Know your rights beforehand. Protesting is something to do. It's popular and it's necessary. It's needed. Just don't go alone. Go with a group. Make sure your group knows each other. Write down stuff on your arms. Be intentional about your safety, because it's important to know, but it's just not enough.
I just want to briefly add into something that Kosar said. There are also cultural barriers. There are language issues, and there's also in terms of immigrants and refugees. If I'm coming from a country where policing is what it is, then as an immigrant or a refugee in this country, that's a whole different dynamic.
Yeah.
Different
dynamic.
So I want to thank all of our panelists for a great discussion. We kind of tapped into a lot of really important things. I also want to thank the National Museum of African American Music for hosting us today. So thank you for tuning in into Just Conversations. And this is our episode on Facts Not Fiction, Know Your Rights Now. And to see other Just Conversation episodes, please visit us at www.justconversations.org.